G'day guys and girls, KennyRaceBoy here and welcome to my garage once again. Have you ever been riding along and thought to yourself, I don't have enough spring in my life? Well, that's called a midlife crisis, but that's not why we're here. Today I'm going to be replacing a spring in my KLR 650. Yes, this is a rear spring. It's a little bit stiffer than the average one, so that'll get us a little bit more carrying capacity, and I'm going to bring you guys along for the ride. The only thing you're going to need that's specialty tools is going to be some spring compressors. I've got two here for the rear spring, so you can compress them and get the old one out. So let's get to it, shall we? So spring wise on my KLR 650, I have chosen to buy an ABAC spring, which I picked up from a place called Happy Trail for $85. The spring rate I've got here is a 500 pounds per inch, and it's a 9-inch free length, also being a 2.25 inch diameter. And of course, as I mentioned, you're going to need some spring compressors to complete this operation. First thing we're going to do at the back of the bike is just support that rear wheel. It'll make it a lot easier when we go to take that rear suspension out. Secondly, on the side of the bike, there is a preload adjust. Turning clockwise, wind it all the way back down to 1. We can now begin to unbolt the bottom assembly. Start by removing the nut to the lower suspension linkage. And then you can move on to the lower shock nut. Make sure there is no weight being applied to the rear wheel so we can remove the shock safely. Remove the bolt holding the lower linkage in place and swing the linkage towards the rear of the bike. Towards the top of the shock again, remove the breather hose that connects to the airbox. Push the hose down and out of the way so we have nice clean access to the upper suspension mount. Using a long socket, undo and remove this bolt. Now the shock should be free of its upper mount. Lastly, remove that lower shock bolt and slide the shock free of its mounts. Now we have to fit the new spring to the old shock. Replacing the old spring with a new one isn't that hard. All we need is some specialty tools, which are some spring compressors. Clamp your shock into a vise so it's easier to work on. Then simply fit the spring compressors over as many coils as you can possibly fit them over. Fit 2 spring compressors, one on each side, evenly spaced apart from each other. Once installed, they should look something like this. Don't be alarmed if the spring compressor does tilt to one side. As long as they're in line with the helical structure of the coil, you're all good. Before we go tightening down those compressors, it's a good idea to apply a small amount of lube to each one. Using a socket wrench, go ahead and tighten down each compressor evenly, making sure they're still aligned. After a bit of tightening, you'll now be able to see the bump stop. Using a screwdriver, gently push this down the shaft. After you've compressed the spring enough, you'll now be able to remove the collar that holds the whole assembly in place. Now begin the process of evenly removing both spring compressors. Once both compressors are off, we can now remove the spring from the shock. Be sure to keep all the parts and accessories that came off with it, and just replace the spring. Comparing the old spring to the new one, we can see there's quite a difference. The old spring is quite thin and a lot longer than what we have now. Insert the old shock guard back into the new spring and place everything back on the shock. Once again, evenly tighten down the spring compressors on each side until it's compressed enough that you can fit the collar back in. The collar should have a notch cut in it. Make sure it's rotated to the opposite side to where the spring's coil ends. Now it's a simple matter of undoing the spring compressors until they can safely be removed. And now your new spring has successfully been installed onto the shock, and we can now start the reassembly process. Orient the shock into the correct position and slide it back up into the shock mount. Using a small amount of thread locker, reinsert the bolt back into the shock. Do this up finger tight for now. Apply a small amount of grease to each bolt and fit them back where they came from. Apply thread locker to each bolt before reassembly and tighten down each nut evenly. And last but not least, we can tighten up the upper shock mount bolt. And of course, don't forget to reinstall that breather tube along with its clamp. And the install is complete. And there we have it, guys. We've replaced the old spring with a new one, which is much better, a lot more carrying capacity. If you have the tools and the know-how, it's a very simple job. I think I only did about an hour's work on it, which is really good. If you guys want to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, the link's below and on screen at the moment. As always, if you have any questions, post them in the box below. I'll be sure to answer them. And yeah, comment, rate and subscribe. And until next time, guys, happy riding. See ya.